I gripped my phone so hard my knuckles turned white under the harsh fluorescent lights of the hallway. Just minutes before I was supposed to walk across the Harvard stage to receive my doctorate, I stared at a live photo of my parents. They weren't sitting in the auditorium. They were standing under a massive arch of pastel balloons, clinking champagne glasses at my younger sister's lavish garden party. Right behind them was a custom banner that literally said, "Congratulations, but not for me." My chest caved in. They looked so incredibly happy abandoning me on the biggest day of my life. But they had absolutely no idea that their perfect little afternoon was about to be destroyed, and their public humiliation would be absolute. Before I tell you exactly how their golden moment turned into a spectacular nightmare, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. This story starts in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and it spirals out of control faster than I ever thought possible. My name is Lillian Reeves. For my entire life, I was the dependable background character in my own family. I was the quiet one, the responsible one. While my younger sister Chloe demanded the spotlight for every minor thing she did, I kept my head down. I worked relentlessly. I survived on a meager grad student salary for years, eating cheap ramen and working late nights in the lab just to make ends meet. I never asked my parents for a dime. I thought if I just worked hard enough, if I reached the absolute highest academic peak imaginable, they would finally look at me the way they looked at Chloe. I thought a Harvard PhD would finally make me visible. I stood backstage at the massive university auditorium, the heavy black fabric of my graduation gown pulling at my shoulders. The red velvet hood signifying my doctorate felt like a physical weight against my back. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I wiped my palms against the fabric of my gown, trying to steady my breathing. I was completely terrified, but not because I was about to walk across one of the most prestigious stages in the entire world. I was terrified because a familiar, sickening dread was creeping up my throat. I had this awful, sinking gut feeling that my family was going to do exactly what they promised they would never do again. I felt it in my bones. They were going to leave me behind. They looked me right in the eyes and told me they would be there. Dad had puffed out his chest a month prior at a family dinner and called it the proudest day of our lives. He acted like my degree was his own personal inheritance, something he could brag about to his friends at the golf course to make himself look like a superior father. Mom even cried on the phone the night before. I can still hear her voice, thick with emotion, telling me she could not wait to see her doctor walk across that stage. She promised they had the hotel booked, the expensive dinner reservations locked in, and that they would be sitting in the 4th row, dead center. She even asked me what color tie Dad should wear to match my academic regalia. I believed her. Like an idiot, I believed her. I peeked past the heavy maroon velvet curtain and stared out into the massive sea of people. The auditorium was a giant cavern echoing with pure excitement and joy. There were row after row of proud parents, beaming siblings, loving partners, and crying grandparents. Some people were waving little handmade banners with their children's names. Others were clutching huge, colorful bouquets of flowers, checking their watches, buzzing with anticipation. Everyone was craning their necks, their eyes bright, desperately trying to get a better look at the people they loved. I watched other graduates standing near me pointing into the crowd, grinning from ear to ear, mouthing the words, "There they are!" They were finding their people. I scanned Section A on the left side. I scanned Section B on the right. I checked the wide center aisles. I even looked up at the sweeping balcony. I desperately searched the 4th row, dead center, exactly where Mom said they would be sitting. Nothing. There were 4 empty folding chairs right in the middle of a packed row. Just a sea of complete strangers surrounding an empty space that belonged to my family. My chest tightened so sharply I thought my ribs might actually crack under the pressure. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thin. The moment the dean stepped up to the wooden podium and tapped the microphone, the energy in the room shifted. Years of sleepless nights, brutal exams, failed laboratory experiments, ruthless dissertation revisions, stressful academic conferences, and the crushing, suffocating loneliness of a rigorous PhD program. All of it was leading up to this exact span of 30 seconds. Dr. Lillian Reeves, The dean's voice boomed through the massive speakers, echoing off the high ceilings. I forced my legs to move. I walked out into the blinding spotlight and the roar of applause. The noise washed over me, but it felt entirely hollow. It sounded like static. I was walking across that stage as if I belonged to absolutely no one. I extended my hand, shook the dean's hand firmly, and took the stiff leather folder holding my diploma. I turned toward the audience and smiled for the blinding flash of the official university photographer. To everyone sitting in those thousands of seats, it probably looked like the perfect culmination of a lifelong dream. They probably saw a confident, successful woman. But from where I was standing, looking out at thousands of clapping hands that did not belong to my mother, my father, or my sister, I felt like a ghost. I felt like I was watching someone else's life play out from the outside. As I stepped down the wooden stairs on the opposite side of the stage and walked into the dimly lit exit corridor, my phone vibrated heavily in the deep pocket of my gown. I knew I should just ignore it. I knew I should go find my cohort, drink some cheap champagne, and celebrate my achievement. But human nature is a cruel, self-destructive thing. I pulled the phone out and tapped the screen. A bright notification lit up the dim hallway. It was a fresh social media post from Chloe. I unlocked the screen and opened the app, and there it was, the final, undeniable nail in the coffin of my childhood. There they all were, my parents, my sister Chloe, and half the extended relatives I grew up with. They were standing outside under twinkling fairy lights and massive, expensive arches of pastel balloons at an incredibly lavish garden party. The round tables behind them were covered in cascading, professional floral arrangements. Everyone was laughing, their heads thrown back in pure joy, and right behind them, strung up prominently between two massive oak trees, was a custom-printed banner that read, "Congratulations, but not for me." Chloe was wearing a ridiculous, flowing floral dress, holding a crystal glass of champagne, posing directly for the camera like she had just won a Nobel Prize. The caption underneath the live video read, "Garden celebration for the best day ever." My thumb hovered over the screen. I tapped the video to let it play. The camera flipped around to show the sprawling backyard of a high-end rented venue. There was a massive dessert bar overflowing with pastries and a multi-tiered cake. Guests were walking around in color-coordinated pastel outfits. It was the kind of party you see in expensive lifestyle magazines. The camera panned quickly, and suddenly my mother filled the screen. She was laughing loudly, her head tossed back, as she poured expensive champagne into a towering pyramid of glasses. Then the camera moved to my dad. He was standing by a massive outdoor grill, holding a pair of silver tongs, telling one of his loud, exaggerated stories to my uncle. He looked completely relaxed, acting as though he wasn't supposed to be sitting in a velvet chair in Cambridge watching his eldest daughter make family history. People in the background were clinking glasses together. Someone off camera yelled out loudly, "You guys must be so proud of her." I watched my mother nod gracefully in the video, accepting the compliment for being such a wonderfully supportive parent. She smiled warmly, while the only thing she had supported that day was a shallow, expensive vanity project that had absolutely nothing to do with me. I looked up from my phone screen, staring straight into the harsh fluorescent lights of the concrete hallway behind the stage. I didn't cry. Something inside of me simply cracked. It wasn't a messy, dramatic, sobbing breakdown. It was a very specific, very clean snap. The desperate, pleading child inside of me who just wanted her parents to show up finally died in that hallway. I realized right then that you cannot fight for custody of your own dignity if you keep handing it over to people who treat it like absolute garbage. That photo, that laughing video, was the absolute limit. It was the moment I decided they wouldn't just hurt me and walk away to eat their fancy catering without consequences. They were going to pay for that choice. When I finally pushed through the heavy double doors and made it back to the main lobby after the ceremony, the entire place was a chaotic, beautiful mess of joy. Friends were pulling their parents close for group photos. People were tossing their black caps into the air, cheering wildly. Husbands were kissing wives. Siblings were tackling each other in massive, tearful hugs. I stood completely still off to the side by a cold concrete pillar, clutching my diploma folder so hard the stiff leather began to warp under my fingertips. I asked a passing usher to take exactly one photo of me standing alone in front of a giant Harvard banner. I didn't smile with my eyes. I just bared my teeth at the camera because taking a picture felt like a grim obligation to document the day, not a genuine celebration. Then, I walked out of the building, caught the subway train, and rode in silence back to my empty, cramped apartment. The silence in my small living room was deafening. It felt heavier and darker than a funeral. At least at a funeral, people openly acknowledge that something has been permanently lost. Here, in my apartment, the loss was completely invisible to everyone but me. I sat down heavily on the edge of my mattress, still wearing my graduation clothes. The red velvet hood draped across my cheap desk chair. The black gown pooled on the cracked linoleum floor like a discarded Halloween costume. My diploma lay flat on my bedspread, completely untouched. The only light in the room came from the harsh, blue glow of my phone screen. I opened my sister's social media post again. I stared hard at the location tag. It was a luxury botanical garden in our hometown, barely a 45-minute drive from where I was sitting. They were so incredibly close. They just didn't care enough to make the drive. I still didn't cry. The tears simply refused to come. Instead, a cold, sharp, calculating clarity washed over my brain. I took a screenshot of the photo and saved the video. I didn't save it to torture myself later. I saved it because I needed hard, undeniable evidence. I needed solid proof that while I stood on one of the biggest academic stages in the world, my family was standing by a rented rose archway, too busy cutting a massive fondant cake to even send a basic text message. I opened my messages and scrolled down past my colleagues to the big extended family group chat. It was ironically called Johnson Clan Forever. For years, that chat had been a dedicated shrine to Chloe. It was constantly filled with daily updates about my sister's minor achievements, her weekend vacations, her new outfits, her desperate attempts to get a promotion at work. Whenever I dropped my own wins in there, like passing my brutal qualifying exams or getting published in a major scientific journal, I was met with a few generic thumbs-up emojis. Then, without fail, my mother would immediately shift the conversation back to Chloe's latest drama or shopping trip. My thumb hovered nervously over the keyboard. My heart pounded furiously against my ribs, a rapid drumming sound in my ears. A tiny, pathetic part of me wanted to close the app, to put the phone down, and to keep playing the familiar role of the understanding, forgiving older sister. But the new version of me, the cold one that cracked into existence in the auditorium hallway, took over completely. I attached the screenshot of their garden party to the chat. I typed a single, deliberate message. Congrats on the beautiful garden party. I graduated from Harvard with my PhD today. My ceremony was at the exact same time, but don't worry, at least someone had a celebration. I hit send. I watched the little text bubble appear on the screen. Read by 1. Read by 3. Read by 12. Suddenly, a little typing bubble popped up from Aunt Linda. Then it quickly disappeared. Then Uncle Rob started typing. Then he stopped. For 2 agonizing minutes, the screen danced with those little gray dots as people started to respond, panicked, deleted their words, and stared at their screens in shock. Finally, Cousin Mark broke the heavy silence. Wait, they skipped your ceremony? Then Aunt Linda chimed in, her text arriving in rapid succession. Today was your graduation? Why didn't your parents just go to that? I thought this garden party was for you too. Chloe said it was a joint celebration for the whole family. The group chat instantly turned into a slow-motion car crash. Questions started stacking up rapidly. Where are your parents? Did they really miss Harvard for a backyard party? Is this a joke? Nobody from my immediate family answered in the main chat. They were completely silent. But my phone vibrated immediately with a private direct message from my mother. Lillian, can we please talk about this later? Don't make a scene in the family chat. You're making your sister feel incredibly bad on her special day. That was cruel. I read her words and felt my jaw clench so tight a sharp pain shot up my temple. She was worried about Chloe feeling bad. I ignored her manipulative text entirely. I went back to the main group chat and typed one final, devastating sentence. Don't worry, everyone. They made their choice. I just wanted a screenshot of it. Then I muted the conversation and tossed the phone onto my desk. For the first time in my entire life, the heavy, suffocating blanket of shame did not belong to me. I had neatly packaged it up and dropped it right at their feet for the whole family to see. But as I sat there breathing in the quiet air, a dark, terrible thought crept into my mind. The money. Ever since I started college, my parents had a joint savings account. Mom always called it the college fund, but when I got full academic scholarships to cover my undergraduate tuition, she rebranded it the Lillian Grad account. She promised me for years that this money was growing, safely tucked away, waiting for the day I finally finished my PhD so they could throw me the massive celebration I deserved. Whenever I panicked about rent or stressed about paying for expensive academic conferences, she would tell me not to worry because my special day was completely financially secured. I grabbed my laptop off the floor and logged into the joint banking portal. My hands were perfectly steady now. I clicked on the specific subaccount labeled Lillian Grad. The page loaded slowly. The balance stared back at me in bold black numbers. $0. I blinked. I hit the refresh button on the browser. I closed the window and opened it again. The number did not change. It wasn't low. It wasn't partially drained for an emergency. It was completely empty. I picked up my phone and called the bank's 24-hour customer service line. After 20 minutes on hold listening to terrible elevator music, a tired woman with a flat voice answered. I verified my identity and asked for the recent transaction history on that specific subaccount. The account was emptied 2 weeks ago by the primary account holder, the representative stated plainly. Can you tell me exactly where the funds went? I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm and detached. Yes, there were several large wire transfers made. The vendor names are listed as Elite Event Catering, Peak Tent Rentals, and Magnolia Floral Design Studio. I thanked the woman politely and hung up the phone. I didn't need a private investigator to connect the dots. My mother had funded Chloe's ridiculous, petty garden party using the money she had spent 8 years telling me was mine. The funds meant to celebrate my once-in-a-lifetime academic achievement had been blown on artisan charcuterie boards, expensive champagne, and pastel balloons to soothe my sister's fragile ego. It felt like watching a bitter divorce unfold, seeing the family assets get liquidated right in front of my eyes just to hurt me. I closed the laptop with a soft click. I didn't scream. I didn't break any plates against the wall. I just pulled out my digital calendar and picked a date exactly 3 weeks away. If they weren't going to celebrate me, I was going to throw my own damn party. 3 weeks later, I threw myself a graduation party. I didn't invite a single person who shared my DNA. The division in my life was set. I messaged some colleagues from the lab, a few loyal friends from my cohort, and my academic mentor who had guided my research. I booked a cheap, covered pavilion at a public park near the university campus. I paid for every single thing out of my own pocket using what little was left of my meager savings. There was no strict dress code. There was no pastel nonsense. There were no custom-printed banners mocking anyone. Just a couple of plastic folding tables, aluminum trays of cheap takeout food from my favorite local restaurant, stacks of red plastic cups, and a grocery store sheet cake that said, Dr. Lillian in messy, bright blue icing. It was absolutely perfect. People brought cheap champagne, loud laughter, and hilarious stories about our grueling years in the program. As the afternoon wore on, one of my closest friends stood up on a wooden picnic bench, raised his plastic cup, and gave a sarcastic, roaring toast to Lillian, who apparently had to organize her own graduation party because the people who raised her were too busy watering the hydrangeas. Everyone at the pavilion laughed loudly, but there was a sharp, biting edge underneath the humor. They all knew the truth. As the sun started to set and we began packing up the leftover food and paper plates, my mentor pulled me aside. She looked at me with this deep, knowing expression, eyes full of quiet understanding. You know, she said gently, placing a hand on my shoulder. Families like that rarely change their behavior unless they are violently forced to face their own reflection. Her words lodged deep in my brain. Forced to face themselves. I didn't know it yet, but the universe was already handling the first phase of that plan for me. New England weather is notoriously unpredictable and unforgiving. Storms can move in fast and without any mercy. While I was laughing in the park, enjoying the clear evening sky with people who actually respected me, my hometown 45 minutes away was getting swallowed whole by a freak weather system. My phone buzzed later that night with a severe local news alert. Sudden severe thunderstorms, flash flood warnings, and high winds ripping through residential neighborhoods and outdoor venues. I didn't make the connection immediately until the next morning when my phone rang while I was making coffee. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I let it ring 4 times. I stared at the screen, watching her name flash, before I finally slid my thumb across the glass to answer. Lillian. Her voice sounded incredibly thin, shaky, and small. It sounded like it was echoing from the bottom of a deep, dark well. Do you have a minute? Curiosity is a stubborn thing, even when you know better. Yeah, I said, leaning back against my kitchen counter and taking a slow sip of black coffee. What's up? There was a long, heavy pause on the line. I heard a shaky, dramatic inhale of breath. The party. Well, you probably saw the pictures online before everything happened. It was beautiful at first. Really, truly beautiful. But then the weather turned. Out of nowhere. I stayed completely silent. I let her sit in the crushing awkwardness of her own words. The wind caught the main event tent, she continued, her voice trembling as if she expected me to offer comfort. It collapsed completely. The expensive floral arrangements were completely ruined. The power went out at the venue. Guests started leaving before we even cut the cake. Chloe was utterly devastated. She locked herself in her room. She says it was the worst day of her entire life. I examined my fingernails, feeling absolutely nothing. That sounds stressful, I replied flatly. We lost a lot of money, Lillian, Mom said, her tone shifting rapidly from sad to frantic and desperate. The venue is holding us financially liable for the damaged equipment. We had to pay for the destroyed tent outright. Insurance won't cover acts of God for outdoor rentals. Dad threatened to get a lawyer and sue them, but the contract they made us sign is ironclad. We are trying to fix this for your sister, but it's really, really hard right now. Another long pause. Then came the absolute mind-boggling audacity. The real ugly reason for the phone call. Sweetheart, we were wondering. Could you help us out? Just a little bit. You're the responsible one in the family. You have your PhD now, you'll be making a real salary soon at a new job. Maybe you could loan us something to get through this mess and pay off the venue. A loan. She wanted a loan from me. I pictured the banking portal in my mind. The zeroed-out account. The transaction list showing my stolen college fund paying for the very tent that just got ripped to shreds by the wind. My blood ran ice cold. So, let me get this straight, I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming cold and razor-sharp. You emptied the savings account that was supposed to be for my graduation. You used my money to pay for a garden party you scheduled on the exact same day as my Harvard ceremony. Then a thunderstorm wrecked the party. And now, you want me to pay you out of my own pocket to fix the damages. I heard a sudden scuffling sound on the other end. Dad grabbed the phone from her hand. His voice barked through the speaker, gruff, authoritative, and violently impatient. We are family, Lillian. We help each other when things get tough. Your sister needed a special day to celebrate her life, and things went wrong. That happens. You can't hold a grudge forever just because we missed one boring academic speech. I'm not holding a grudge, I replied, staring blankly at the wall, my voice utterly devoid of emotion. I'm just keeping the bill exactly where it belongs. Mom snatched the phone back. She started crying, producing real, loud sobs this time. We didn't mean to hurt you. We thought we could make it up to you later. Please, honey. Your sister is in absolute pieces. She said she feels like the universe is actively punishing her. A harsh, dry laugh ripped out of my throat before I could stop it. If the universe punished anyone, it started with me. But here is the stark reality. You chose her party over my ceremony. You chose to spend my graduation fund on her decorations. You chose to gamble with money that wasn't yours. Now you can choose how to dig yourselves out of debt. But I am completely, permanently done paying for choices I didn't make. Dad shouted in the background, his voice echoing through the receiver. This is ridiculous. After everything we've done for you, we raised you. You mean like skipping my doctorate ceremony so you could pose under fairy lights? I snapped back, finally letting the pure, unadulterated steel slip into my voice. Or do you mean stealing my savings for someone else's catered lunch? I think I've paid you back with interest. The silence on the line was suffocating. I could almost hear them blinking in sheer shock. They were so used to me rolling over and taking the abuse silently. They didn't know how to handle a version of me that fought back. So that's it, Mom whispered, sounding horrified and deeply offended. You're just going to abandon us? You're going to leave us to deal with this alone? I looked at the framed Harvard diploma sitting on my cheap desk. You left me alone first. I'm just finally matching your energy. No, it was a tiny word, just 2 letters. But it felt like a massive iron vault door slamming shut and locking firmly into place. I hung up the phone, opened my settings, and blocked both of their numbers. Months passed after that phone call. My family, desperate to save face, spun their own ridiculous, victim-centered narrative to the extended relatives. They painted me as the ungrateful, wealthy, arrogant eldest daughter who cruelly refused to help her poor, struggling family when a tragic, unforeseen storm ruined her sister's special day. They conveniently left out the part where the storm only destroyed a party built entirely on stolen money and shattered promises. They thought they had successfully controlled the damage. They thought their public image was safe and pristine. They were so incredibly wrong. In late October, I was invited to present my research at a major, highly publicized academic conference in San Francisco. This wasn't some small, localized campus gathering. This was a massive industry event. There were packed auditoriums, leading industry experts, and panel discussions featuring people whose books I had meticulously cited in my dissertation. Professionally, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. I was hoping the immense exposure might lead to a solid, lucrative tenure-track position or a major corporate promotion somewhere decent. The presentation itself went perfectly. I walked onto that massive stage with my slides perfectly cued, my data rigorously polished, and my voice completely unwavering. I commanded the room with absolute authority. For the first time in my entire life, I felt like I was standing on a stage entirely on my own merit. I was no longer auditioning for my parents' elusive, conditional approval. I was simply Dr. Reeves. It was during the final Q&A session at the end of my panel that the trajectory of my family's life permanently, irrevocably changed. The moderator opened the floor for questions. A woman in the 3rd row stood up, adjusted her glasses, and grabbed the microphone. She looked at me intently and asked, Dr. Reeves, your research requires an intense, almost punishing amount of dedication. What kept you going during the hardest, most isolating parts of your PhD? How did you stay motivated when it felt like no one understood what you were sacrificing? I could have given the standard, boring, perfectly professional answer. I could have talked about a deep passion for the data or the rigorous discipline of the scientific method. But as I looked out at the hundreds of faces looking up at me, waiting for my answer, something heavy inside my chest shifted. I thought about the 4 empty folding chairs in the 4th row at Harvard. I thought about the drained bank account that was supposed to be mine. I thought about my mother begging for money to pay for ruined floral arrangements while completely ignoring my achievements. I leaned closely into the microphone. Honestly, I said, my voice echoing clearly and powerfully through the massive room. What kept me going was realizing, far too late in life, that I was chasing approval from people who never actually showed up. The entire room went dead silent. It was that thick, heavy, electrifying silence that means hundreds of people are hanging on to your every single word. I didn't hold back. I told the story. I kept my voice incredibly steady and clinical, speaking as if I was presenting a factual experiment. I explained how I spent nearly a decade surviving on absolute scraps to earn a Harvard PhD. I told them how my parents explicitly promised they would be in the front row to watch me cross the stage. I described the exact moment I walked off the stage, pulled out my phone, and saw the social media post of them drinking expensive champagne at my younger sister's lavish garden party taking place at the exact same hour. A collective, audible gasp rippled through the large audience. I told them about checking my bank account and finding the college fund wiped to absolute zero to pay for pastel balloons and a custom banner. I told them about the sudden thunderstorm that ripped the party tent to shreds, and the unbelievable phone call asking me to pay the financial damages for the very party they chose over my graduation. I didn't use their real names. I didn't name my hometown or the specific venue, but I delivered the raw emotional truth with absolute, devastating precision. At some point, I concluded, looking straight out into the sea of faces in the crowd, I realized my worth could not hang on people who didn't even bother to put me in their calendar. So, I stopped waiting for them to love me, and I started building a life that couldn't be taken away by their selfish choices, or by bad weather. There was a beat of stunned, heavy silence, and then the audience absolutely erupted. It wasn't polite academic golf clapping. It was a deafening roar. People stood up from their seats. The applause hit me right in the chest like a physical wave. Afterward, dozens of strangers approached me in the lobby with tears streaming down their faces, shaking my hand, thanking me, and sharing their own painful stories of being the forgotten, unloved sibling. What I didn't know was that a young graduate student sitting in the front row had recorded the entire 5-minute answer on his smartphone. That evening, he uploaded the raw, unedited clip to a major video sharing platform. He titled it, "She Got a Harvard PhD." Her parents skipped the ceremony for her sister's garden party. Within 48 hours, the video exploded. It hit 1 million views, then 3 million, then 10. The internet is a wild, unpredictable, and ruthless beast, and my story hit a massive cultural nerve. Thousands of comments poured in from all over the world. Absolute strangers were fiercely outraged on my behalf. They dissected every single word I said in the video. They called my parents narcissistic monsters. They coined viral hashtags like #GardenPartyParents and #StormKarma. I hadn't asked anyone to attack my family. I had simply stopped hiding their ugly secrets in the dark. But the internet plays detective better than anyone. It took less than 3 days for people in the comment section to match my face to my academic profile, find my hometown, and trace my social media connection straight to my sister, Chloe. Chloe's carefully curated, aesthetically pleasing online life instantly turned into a digital war zone. Her followers, who used to praise her fake brunch photos, turned on her viciously. They flooded her comments with screenshots of my video. "Is this you? Did you really steal your sister's graduation money for a tent? Enjoy the storm karma. You selfish brat." Chloe panicked and locked all her accounts down, making everything private, but the damage was already done. The ripple effects reached far beyond the internet and crashed directly into her real life. Chloe worked in marketing for a mid-sized tech company that aggressively prided itself on its inclusive, ethical, and supportive family culture. The company's official corporate social media pages were suddenly tagged thousands of times by angry viewers demanding answers. Is this the kind of unethical, selfish behavior your employees represent? Do you support stealing college funds? Corporate HR hates negative public attention. They hate it more than absolutely anything else. The sudden, glaring spotlight forced the HR department to look very closely at Chloe's employment record. They opened a formal internal review to investigate her character. While digging into her files and emails, they uncovered a massive, undeniable problem. The small creative team Chloe managed was staffed almost entirely by her former sorority sisters and personal friends. She had been intentionally bypassing standard corporate hiring protocols for years, pushing through fake referrals, and blocking highly qualified candidates just to give her friends easy salaries and bonuses. Words like nepotism and gross ethical violations started flying around the corporate emails. To the public, the company claimed they were simply doing a routine ethics audit triggered by public concern. But behind closed doors, it was a brutal, swift act of damage control. By the end of the week, Khloe was officially stripped of her upcoming promotion and formally suspended, without pay pending a full investigation. She was facing immediate termination and a permanent, glaring stain on her professional record. She was losing everything she had built her fake persona upon. My phone, which had been blissfully silent from them for months, suddenly started blowing up with blocked numbers and frantic voicemails. I didn't answer a single one, but I sat in my quiet apartment and listened to the recordings. Khloe's voice was raw, hysterical, and broken. "Lillian, please, I know you didn't say my name in that video, but everyone knows it's me. I can't walk into the grocery store without feeling like people are staring at me. My boss won't even look at me. They are talking about firing me. People are calling mom and dad abusive. Please, you have to fix this. Tell them it's a lie. Tell them you forgive us. Please." I deleted the voicemail with a single tap of my finger. I sat back on my couch, sipping a cup of coffee, feeling a strange, profound sense of peace wash over me. I didn't ruin her life. I just handed her a mirror, and the whole world finally saw the ugly truth she had been hiding behind her pastel balloons. The silence in my apartment the morning after I deleted Khloe's voicemail was the most profound, beautiful peace I had ever experienced in my entire life. It was better than any paycheck, better than any massive corporate salary, and better than the hollow praise I had spent my entire youth chasing. But out there in the real world, the digital storm I had accidentally started was tearing through my family's carefully constructed reality with absolute brutal force. My mother's text messages started arriving at all hours of the day and night. They were no longer angry. They were no longer defensive or dismissive of my feelings. They were frantic, fragmented, and completely terrified. She texted me at 2 in the morning saying my father wasn't sleeping at all. She said he just paced the hardwood floors of their expensive suburban home, staring out the living room window into the dark street, completely paralyzed by the sudden, spectacular collapse of his public reputation. He had spent his whole life building an image of the perfect American family man, and now the entire country was treating him like a villain. Mom told me she couldn't even go to her weekly Sunday church service without feeling a burning paranoia. She sat in the wooden pews constantly wondering exactly who in the congregation had seen the viral video. The whispers in our hometown were growing louder every single day. The affluent community they had tried so incredibly hard to impress was now looking at them with thinly veiled disgust. People talk. And in a town like ours, gossip is a blood sport. It got so bad that Aunt Linda, the exact same aunt who had started the harsh questioning in the family group chat months prior, finally cornered my mother at a local grocery store. Right there in the produce aisle, next to the organic apples, Linda asked her point blank if the horrible parents in that viral graduation video were them. Mom couldn't even lie her way out of it. She was so overwhelmed that she just burst into tears, abandoned a completely full shopping cart right there in the middle of the aisle, and practically ran out to her car. Mom texted me this entire story like it was a tragic event that should immediately make me drop everything, rush back to my hometown, and fix their broken lives. She wanted me to act like a defense lawyer, jumping in to protect them from the natural consequences of their own actions. But I had finally learned the critical difference between absolute cruelty and simple consequence. I didn't ask the internet to pick sides. I certainly didn't launch a malicious, calculated campaign against them. I just told the honest truth in a room full of strangers and simply stopped covering up their bad behavior. The nightmare they were living was just their own ugly reflection staring right back at them from a digital screen they couldn't manipulate. Meanwhile, the corporate investigation at Khloe's marketing firm concluded rapidly, and it was an absolute bloodbath. The Human Resources Department dug into her corporate emails and found a massive, undeniable trail of unethical behavior. The nepotism, the deeply unfair hiring practices, and the blatant favoritism she used to build her little office kingdom were all thoroughly documented. She had been blocking highly qualified candidates just to guarantee a comfortable salary and an easy promotion for her former sorority sisters. They terminated her employment contract immediately. She lost her impressive six-figure salary. She kissed her highly anticipated executive promotion goodbye. Security literally had to escort her out of the glass corporate building while carrying a cardboard box of her desk belongings. Some of her biggest, most lucrative clients even pulled their marketing accounts after seeing the viral video, openly stating that the entire situation raised serious, fundamental questions about her professional judgment and basic character. The financial strain on my parents became unbearable almost overnight. Between paying off the massive debts from the ruined garden party, replacing the destroyed rental equipment from the storm, and hiring expensive crisis management consultants to try and salvage the mess, their bank accounts quickly ran dry. They had already spent my college fund. That money was supposed to be my financial safety net, my inheritance of sorts, to help me start my adult life. But they effectively burned that inheritance to pay for a vanity party that ended in a total disaster. Now, the crushing weight of their bad choices was drowning them financially. Dad tried to fight the event venue in court, but his lawyer told him the rental contract they signed was absolutely ironclad. They were fully liable for the storm damage. Within a few months, the bank threatened foreclosure. They actually had to sell the beautiful family house just to pay off their mounting legal fees, the venue debts, and to help Chloe cover her rent since she was now completely unemployed and practically unemployable. They were forced to pack up their perfect, image-obsessed lives in cheap cardboard boxes and move into a cramped spare bedroom at my uncle's house. It was a spectacular, humiliating fall from grace. Nearly a year after the academic conference in San Francisco, after the viral video had permanently altered the landscape of my family tree, and after the ethics investigation officially ruined my sister's career, I received a very unexpected email. I was invited to speak at another major corporate leadership event. But this time, they didn't want me to just talk about my complex scientific research or my data models. They wanted me to talk about human resilience, the absolute necessity of hard boundaries, and the hidden, devastating cost of being the forgotten good kid in a heavily lopsided family. The event organizers officially called it a keynote address. I looked at the digital contract, signed my name at the bottom, and called it closure. I was finally going to take full, unapologetic custody of my own story. The leadership event was scheduled to take place in a massive, opulent hotel ballroom not very far from the hometown where I actually grew up. Driving back toward that familiar area felt incredibly strange. It felt like I was driving to a funeral for a life I used to desperately want. The sky was deeply overcast, casting a gray, muted light over the busy American interstate. I listened to the steady hum of my car tires against the asphalt, passing the familiar exit signs I used to take when I was a naive college student heading home for the holidays, hoping this time they would finally notice my achievements. I pulled into the massive hotel parking lot, grabbed my leather binder full of speaking notes, and walked through the heavy revolving glass doors into the bustling lobby. The air smelled like expensive coffee and convention center carpet. Professionals in sharp suits were mingling, exchanging business cards, and checking their phones. Deep down in my gut, I knew there was a very solid chance my family would show up today. Public shame makes desperate people do incredibly strange things. It makes them beg, it makes them bargain, and it makes them aggressively try to rewrite history to make themselves the victims. The event was publicly listed online. Anyone could buy a ticket. I mentally prepared myself for the possibility of an ambush, keeping my posture completely straight, my chin up, and my expression entirely neutral. I wasn't wrong. I saw them almost as soon as I walked into the crowded pre-event reception area outside the main ballroom doors. They were standing near a towering marble pillar near the restrooms, looking completely out of place among the confident corporate professionals and eager university students. If I hadn't known them my whole life, I might not have even recognized them. They looked significantly smaller somehow. The familiar, suffocating arrogance that used to radiate from them had completely evaporated into thin air. Dad's broad shoulders were heavily hunched forward under a suit jacket that looked a size too big for him now, making him look frail, tired, and deeply defeated. He looked like a man who had just lost a brutal custody battle over his own pride. Mom's eyes were deeply sunken, framed by dark, heavy sleepless circles that no amount of expensive department store concealer could hide. She was clutching her purse with both hands, looking around nervously like a cornered animal. And then there was Chloe. My younger sister's once effortless, glowing confidence had been entirely replaced with the stiff, terrified posture of someone who had been sitting in way too many hostile meetings with corporate HR executives. She wore a plain, dark gray dress. There were no bright pastel colors today. No attention-grabbing floral patterns. No expensive highlights in her hair. She looked pale, exhausted, and remarkably ordinary. The golden child had completely lost her shine. They saw me walk in. I felt their eyes lock onto me from all the way across the crowded room. My heart kicked hard against my ribs, a sudden violent spike of old childhood anxiety flaring up in my chest. My palms started to sweat, but I forced myself to keep walking forward. I did not break my stride. I did not smile, I did not frown, and I certainly did not wave. I treated them exactly like what they were, complete strangers in a crowded room. They didn't approach me before the talk started. They stayed glued to the back wall near the exit doors, watching my every move. Maybe they were nervously waiting to see exactly what I was going to say. Maybe they were holding on to some wild, delusional hope that I wouldn't mention them at all on stage. They probably thought I would spare them further embarrassment now that they had lost their beautiful house, their money, and their precious social standing. They probably hoped the punishment was finally over. Spoiler alert. I didn't mention their specific names in my speech, but I absolutely did not erase the true story either. I was not going to dilute my own lived experience to make my abusers feel comfortable. I walked past the rows of velvet chairs, checked my microphone battery with the audio technician, and took a deep, steadying breath. I looked out at the massive room filling up with eager faces. I was ready to close this dark chapter of my life permanently. I was entirely ready to divorce myself completely from their toxic expectations and walk into my future. The heavy chandelier lights dimmed, the crowd quieted down, and the event announcer called my name over the massive speaker system. I walked right onto that brightly lit stage, took a deep breath of the cool, conditioned air, and looked out at the massive crowd. I told the absolute truth again. But this time, I wasn't just speaking to academics in a tiny panel room. I was speaking to a massive room full of diverse corporate professionals, eager university students, young managers, and regular people who had come specifically because they had watched that first viral clip on the internet and desperately needed to hear more of the story. I gripped the smooth, wooden edges of the podium. I didn't use a slideshow. I just spoke directly from my heart. I talked openly about the exhausting, soul-crushing reality of overfunctioning in a dysfunctional household. I talked about children who are systematically trained from birth to earn basic parental affection through high academic achievements, while other siblings are handed love simply for breathing. I talked about the specific pain of growing up in families who worshipped fake outward appearances instead of genuinely loving the living, breathing people under their own roof. I kept my voice perfectly level. I didn't let my emotions break my rhythm. I talked about the specific day my parents skipped my Harvard PhD ceremony to attend a shallow, heavily catered garden party. I talked about logging into my banking portal and finding the drained savings account, the college fund that was supposed to be mine, completely wiped out to pay for a party I wasn't even invited to. I talked about the unbelievable, audacious phone call asking me to hand over my own hard-earned salary to pay for the severe weather damage to a party tent. I talked about the exact moment I firmly stopped being the reliable safety net for people who never once stood under me to catch me when I fell. I told the audience that you cannot heal in the exact same environment that made you sick, and you cannot demand loyalty from someone after you have spent years spending their emotional currency without ever making a deposit. I kept the entire speech highly clinical and almost entirely detached. I didn't cry on stage. I didn't scream into the microphone. I just laid my life out for them like raw, undeniable data. The energy in the room was electric. When I finally finished speaking and offered a quiet, "Thank you," the applause thundered against the walls. It was deafening. Nearly 1,000 people stood up on their feet. Afterwards, during the scheduled intermission break, people immediately lined up in the wide hallway just to speak to me. Strangers shook my hand warmly. People shared their own deep familial wounds, telling me about their own stolen college funds, their own unfair siblings, their own parents who played favorites. They told me my story made them feel a little less crazy and a little less alone in the world. It was incredibly validating to see my personal pain transformed into something genuinely helpful and empowering for others. Somewhere far beyond that long, winding line of people, I saw my family. They were standing rigidly by the back wall, silently watching me interact with the crowd. They looked like ghosts haunting a building they didn't belong in anymore. When the crowd finally thinned out and people started heading back into the main hall for the next speaker, my family slowly moved toward me. Chloe reached me first. She walked with a hesitant, shaky step. She didn't look anything like the smug, glowing girl in that garden photo anymore. Her expensive mascara had heavily smudged under her eyes, making her look incredibly tired. Her hands shook violently at her sides, and her eyes glistened with the raw, terrifying kind of fear that only comes from realizing the real world is drastically bigger and much less forgiving than your carefully curated social media image. "Lillian," she choked out, her voice cracking painfully on the syllables of my name. "Please, I really need to talk to you." Right behind her, my parents hovered nervously like scolded children who had just been sent to the principal's office. Mom was intensely wringing her hands together, staring at the patterned hotel carpet. Dad was repeatedly clenching and unclenching his jaw, a thick muscle ticking visibly in his cheek. "My job, my whole life, it's a total mess," Chloe said in a panicked rush, the words spilling out of her mouth like she couldn't hold them in anymore. "The internal investigation found stuff. They went through my emails. They're officially saying I benefited from unfair hiring practices. Some major corporate clients pulled out entirely after seeing the video online. They said it raised serious questions about my judgment. They fired me, Lillian. I have nothing." Suddenly, her knees literally buckled beneath her. Before I could even decide whether or not to step forward and catch her, Chloe dropped hard to the carpeted floor. Right there, in front of the remaining event staff packing up the coffee station and straggling attendees, she knelt right at my feet. Tears began streaming rapidly down her pale face, dripping off her chin. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking into a desperate, agonizing sob. "Please tell them it's not as bad as it sounds. Tell people you forgave us. Make a public statement. Post something on your accounts. I'm begging you. Please fix this." Chloe reached out and grabbed the fabric of my dress, crying harder, her shoulders heaving with every sob. "They're talking about suing me for breach of contract. Mom and Dad had to sell the house just to pay the legal fees from the venue. We're staying in Uncle Rob's basement right now. We're completely drowning. I can't find a job anywhere. My salary is gone. Everything is gone." Hearing her say it out loud didn't bring me a sense of evil joy. It didn't feel like a victory lap. It just felt incredibly heavy and deeply sad. Mom suddenly stepped forward from behind Dad and started crying loudly, too. "Lillian, we know we totally messed up," Mom said, reaching a trembling hand out toward me, though she stopped just short of actually touching my arm. "We know we hurt you terribly. We were wrong. We were incredibly selfish. We were totally blind to your feelings all those years. We shouldn't have taken your college fund. We shouldn't have skipped your big day. Please, honey, we're asking for a second chance. We've lost so much already. We have nothing left." Dad didn't shed a tear. He was too stubborn for that. But his gruff voice broke in a strange, vulnerable way I had never heard in my entire life when he finally spoke. "You made your point, Lillian. The whole world knows what we did. We get it. We are so sorry. Just stop this whole thing before there is absolutely nothing left of this family. Call off the dogs." For a very long, tense moment, I didn't say a single word. I didn't react. I just looked down at them. I stared at the exact people who had laughed so freely under expensive string lights while I walked completely alone across a stage. I looked at the parents who had coldly stolen my financial future to pay for decorative flowers. I looked at the golden sister who had happily bathed in applause that was supposed to be shared with me. I looked at the broken, miserable family who had finally been violently forced to live in the exact same cold emptiness they had ruthlessly carved out of my own chest for years. "You think this is about ruining you?" I said, keeping my voice incredibly quiet, steady, and utterly devoid of sympathy. "It's not." Chloe sniffled loudly, wiping her nose with the back of her hand, looking up at me with wide, bloodshot eyes. "I didn't launch a campaign against you," I stated clearly, making sure every single word landed. "I didn't even name you in that video. I just told my story. The rest? The lost jobs, the lost house, the public shame? That's just the real world finally seeing you the exact same way I've seen you my entire life. That's just gravity." My sister sobbed even harder, burying her face in her hands. "I know, okay. I know I was awful. I was totally selfish. I used you as a prop when it made me look good, and I ignored you when it didn't. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Can't we just start over? Can't we just be a family again?" I knelt down on the carpet so I was exactly eye level with her. I didn't do it to comfort her. I didn't reach out to hug her. I did it to make absolutely sure my final words landed exactly where they needed to strike. "You took everything from me," I said, my voice low but vibrating with years of suppressed, quiet anger. "Every spotlight, every chance, every single ounce of room I might have had to just exist without being constantly compared to you. You took my graduation day, you took my savings, you took my family, and you never once looked back to see if I was surviving." I took a slow, deep breath, smelling the stale convention center air. "Now I'm taking something back. Not by lying to the public, not by scheming behind your backs, and not by launching a lawsuit. I'm taking my life back by simply refusing to cover up for you anymore." I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my dress. I looked at my father, then my mother, and finally down at Chloe. "I won't make a public statement. I won't tell anyone on the internet to stop talking. I won't come online and pretend we're all perfectly fine now, just so you can rebuild your fake image on top of my pain one more time. You are on your own." Chloe panicked. She lunged forward and clutched tightly at my hand, her fingernails digging into my skin. I didn't yank it away angrily. I just gently, firmly pried her trembling fingers off of me, one by one, until I was entirely free of her grip. "I hope you find a way to live with what you've done," I said, looking right into her tear-streaked face. "Really, I do. But you'll be doing it entirely without me." Mom gasped loudly, covering her mouth with both hands. She whispered, "Lillian, please, we're still your family." I looked at my mother one last time. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clean closure. "You were my family," I corrected her firmly. "Now you're just people who made choices, and choices have consequences." I turned on my heel and walked away down the long hallway toward the exit doors before any of them could say another word. I didn't look back over my shoulder, not even once. That night, sitting alone in my quiet, peaceful hotel room, I sat at the small wooden desk and wrote one final letter to them. It was the only one I actually put down on physical paper. I poured every last drop of my childhood grief into that ink. I folded the heavy paper carefully, walked down to a small, secluded outdoor terrace where the event staff had left a heavy metal fireproof bowl for used candles. I placed the folded letter inside the metal bowl. I struck a match, dropped it in, and stood there watching the bright orange flames curl and blacken the paper. The toxic words, the heavy burdens, and the unfulfilled expectations I had carried for years turned to gray ash in seconds, drifting away into the cool night air. I was finally free. The next morning, during the final closing session of the conference, someone in the crowd asked me a brilliant question. It's the exact same question I'll now ask the people listening to this story. If you were in my place, If you were the child they callously left sitting completely alone on graduation day, would you give them a second chance? Or would you finally let them choke on the bitter taste of their own terrible choices? Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it wasn't an easy one to hear, but I hope this resonated with you in some way. Family dynamics can be incredibly brutal, and sometimes walking away is the absolute only way to survive and protect your own sanity. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation where you had to cut ties with toxic family members just to save yourself? Let me know down below in the comments. Now, if you are still here listening to my voice right at this exact second, you are officially part of the 1% Club. Drop a comment with the letter W right now. W stands for winner. That is our secret code to recognize the amazing people who actually watch a video all the way to the very end. I see you, and I appreciate you. Don't forget to hit that like button and follow the channel so we can share more stories together soon. Stay strong and protect your peace.